Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell. You'll get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And when I'm not asking Bruce, hey, how big was Batista's? Well, you know. One of the things I like to do is help people save money. And if you're watching this video right now and you're in a 30-year loan, man, you're overpaying your single biggest bill and you may not even realize it. I want you to do a little experiment for me. Take your calculator out, multiply your monthly house payment by 360 payments. That's how many payments there are in a 30-year loan. That big scary number, that's your total of payments. You're looking at that number? You know you can do better. Keep more of your own money right now and go to savewithconrad.com. Or maybe you've got credit card debt. Man, it's not a matter of if I can save you money with that. Your average interest rate on a credit card is more than 20%. And by the way, all the interest you pay on those credit cards, it's not tax deductible. Whereas the mortgage interest, well, that is tax deductible. So if you owe this debt, it's up to you how to pay it back. Doesn't it make sense to get the cheapest rate possible and the greatest tax deduction possible? Find out how much money you can save right now for free at savewithconrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. Even scores in the 500s can be approved, and it's no cost out of pocket. But maybe best of all, we're licensed in more than 40 states. We can help more families than ever before. But how much can we save you? Find out right now for free with a quick quote from savewithconrad.com.
Hello and welcome to Dark Side of the Podcast. This is Paul Bromwell filling in for Conrad this week. And I want to welcome the creators of this amazing series that we all enjoy Thursday nights on Vice, Evan, Jason, and as we learned last week, the Mr. Fuji of the Dark Side of the Ring series, Howard Sheffman. Guys, how we doing this week?
Great.
We're doing good.
Yeah, doing well.
Wonder what Conrad has that's going on that's more important than this, but I guess we'll find out eventually. But thanks for filling in, Paul.
Yeah, no problem, man. Listen, he is taking a vacation. They're going to let him take a vacation for a few days, so we can't be mad at that.
No, much deserved. Much deserved.
Hardest working man in podcast for sure. So,
yeah.
so guys, listen, we're coming off of a very heavy episode on Grizzly Smith. We followed up with the story of Tom Billington, known to fans as the Dynamite Kid. And this was another eye-opening episode, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, this is a story that's been on our radar, I think, since the beginning of the show. Obviously, Tom's story is a dark, disturbing tale, and it's a very emotional family tale as well, and one that we considered a lot. And I think maybe we didn't do it earlier was because there were, I think there was the High Spots documentary, and there was a couple other things out there. But I think once we got around to season 3, and of course after Tom's passing, it was just sort of like maybe something we should revisit. And I even thought at one point we could do a story about the British Bulldogs in general, both of them, do maybe a 2-part episode about Davey or about Tom. And that was kind of one thought at a period in time. But then the WWE announced they were doing a doc about Davey Boy Smith. So then we kind of changed that idea. And then it just kind of became a story just about Dynamite, which I'm really glad that that's how this all worked out, because that made the most sense, for us. But yeah, definitely a story that is on brand for the show.
Yeah, it's pretty much since we started working on season 1, the story of Dynamite Kid is, if you're just even remotely, familiar with wrestling history, that is a story that you knew had some, darkness to it. And we needed it to be the right time to be able to tell it. And, with us doing the first 2 seasons, and I think how we handled the Owen Hart episode really helped us open up some doors to be able to tell this story right.
Yeah, and we kind of talk about, week to week how, or on Confidential, we've talked about how with the progression of the episodes or the progression of the seasons, it's opened new doors for us, like with season 1, Bruiser Brody opened up a lot of doors for season 2. And likewise with the Benoit and Owen episodes, those kind of opened doors for season 3 that weren't there before. And I think finally being able to tell this story is, definitely because of that, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, let's jump into this one. The first thing that I noticed right off the bat was we see Lance Storm for the first time on a Dark Side episode. Talk to us about working with him for this one in particular.
Man, Lance Storm. I mean, I was a fan growing up of Lance. You know, being a total ECW mark as a kid, but he wasn't really someone on my radar that felt like I just never anticipated him to be on an episode of our show, and he actually came into the fold. You're going to see him later on in the year when we return with the second half of season 3, which I think was a shock to many people last night watching that there is a summer break for Dark Side, but there is, global crisis makes it a little hard to produce a show, but no, but Lance is a incredible interview in the Johnny K9, aka Bruiser Bedlam episode that's coming up, because he was Lance was in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And he would come over to Jericho's, flop house he was crashing at during the Smoky Mountain days, and Johnny K9 was living there. So Lance had a close working relationship with him, and Lance is fantastic in that episode. But Lance having such strong roots in Calgary and with the Hart family, and knowing just so much about wrestling. I mean, he knows he's a historian in his own right. We were just taken aback by what a great interview he was.
Yeah.
And so we just
suit. He looked
he was ready. And he was so nice, just so friendly, and had watched a majority of the episodes and enjoyed them, and that was cool. And then he was just great. And so we asked him some Dynamite questions, and he was great.
He came to talk about Johnny K9, and he grew up as coming into wrestling. He went to the Hart brothers school, and he was someone who modeled themselves after Dynamite in terms of that style of being a smaller guy in the world of giants. And he told me a great story about how when he first arrived in Calgary, the first thing he did, because he was such a fan of Dynamite Kid, was that he looked up his number in the phone book and found his phone number and was found his address. And in his head, he's like, I'm going to go to Dynamite's house. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm going to show him I'm going to be a wrestler.
Great.
And he basically realized right before doing that is that's a terrible idea. I already know he has a reputation as kind of a mean fella. And he basically was if I did that, I probably would not be a wrestler.
Yeah.
But he did once meet Dynamite, him and Jericho. I don't know if you remember this story, where they were I can't remember where it was, but it was they were at a hotel, and Dynamite was at the bar, and him and Jericho just walk up to the to where Dynamite is, smiles on their faces. Dynamite sees them a mile away, and basically I think he said nope or something, and they just turn right around and leave.
Yeah, I'm sure if he did go to his front door there, he probably would have wound up without eyebrows and what hair he had, and eventually in the near future.
Yeah, right.
And that's one of the things we highlight in the show too is Dynamite Kid was one of those wrestlers who opened so many doors for the smaller stature wrestler, and showed people what was possible with that, because he's just such an unbelievable performer. And for my money, Dynamite, it's hard. I've said this before, but it's hard to actually find better wrestling than some of those matches that he had with Tiger Mask. Those hold up so well, and it's just amazing to think that those are 30 years old, those matches, and just how dynamic they are, how hard hitting they are. Obviously, it's not a sustainable way to work, because and there's definitely spots there that will make you cringe when you watch it. But it's absolutely some of the most exciting, exhilarating wrestling you can see. Actually, my girlfriend, who doesn't really watch wrestling, I remember I think I was watching back one of those matches, and it's it made her stop in her tracks and be like, "Whoa!" It took her breath away, And I think that there's not much wrestling I think you can watch, on tape without being there, that really is going to just make you completely that's just going to capture you like that. So he is, one of the best, if not top 3 of all time, in my opinion, just because Yeah, it looks real, and I mean, because it is real, but it's just absolutely, he's just an amazing talent.
Well, what's real about it is the toll that it took on his body. So, I mean, his physical style, I was sitting there watching the highlights of that Tiger Mask match, and I'm thinking, now this is way ahead and a lot more choreographed, but I'm thinking Ospreay Ricochet when that hit the web and all the choreographed moves they did. Not that this was choreographed, but the hard-hitting, fast action that was constant flowing in the exchanges and the back and forth was unlike anything that we had seen at that point in wrestling.
Yeah. And Dave Meltzer says in the episode too, he says wrestling as we know it today, starts with, Tiger Mask and Dynamite. And it's 100% true. You really, and so many wrestlers that came after that were trying to emulate those chain maneuvers, that fast action, the, spilling out into the ring and die. I mean, those matches have all the suicide dives and, yeah, I mean, it all kind of goes back to that point, and because of Dynamite's complicated legacy and life outside the ring and the controversy, a lot of that has been, he's not part of the wrestling conversation as much anymore, and so that's, one of the things we also examined.
I'd recommend people watch, if you haven't seen the Madison Square Garden one between those two. It's really interesting because it American audiences had never seen it. You can watch the crowd grow, getting out of their seats, and Vince is on commentary and you hear him losing his mind, being like, what am I seeing here? This is something that isn't what wrestling is supposed to be, but it's not it's a bad thing. It's it's an audience and commentary and everyone being like, oh, this is the next evolution of what wrestling will be. And that's fascinating. And it stands the test of time like nothing else.
Yeah,
totally.
To your point, Evan, Meltzer said there is no Jushin Liger without Dynamite Kid on the episode. So, I mean, one thing that came through was that he was a game changer in the business. So, absolutely. One thing else I wanted to follow up with Lance Storm before we move on here is he's made the comment, the worst case of little man syndrome in the history of the world. Was that something that everybody else or others that you interviewed with kind of agreed on and said that's how he felt?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a major theme in this episode. I mean, Dynamite, I think, did have a chip on his shoulder as he was coming up through the business, and being a tough kid from Wales, and that reputation of just a hard drinking, son of a gun. And I think that he did often feel, maybe because of the culture of wrestling at the time or getting into the business, that, having to continually prove himself and, go the extra mile with the extreme bumps, putting on those shows, risking his body, having no regard for his body, as Meltzer says as well too. And, that's the way one would stand out. And of course, all the steroids and everything. And, he also has this aura of, very toxic behavior that he exudes to those in the locker room and eventually to family members. And I think all of that, which I'm sure we'll get to later on in the episode, comes to a head, even though there's other factors involved in it too. But I think one of the main points of it in our episode is at least the encounter with Jacques Rougeau. And I think when that sort of facade for him is shattered, it's like he almost can't handle his masculinity being destroyed in that way. Like he can't handle being perceived as less than, because at a certain point he had earned the reputation of being such the top dog after fighting so diligently to overcome those shortcomings. And he felt entitled to that. And I think after that just put him on a path that, and of course other factors, but that put him on a path of self-destruction and chaos and terror, really.
I think there's also a little bit he's at the time he's so respected among his peers, and with that comes a bit of power that I think he could abuse around that that social circle. So that's something that he's almost kind of protected by that for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So as we're going through, we are introduced to his ex-wife, we're introduced to his daughters, they both speak, but the one person that we're not introduced to on camera or interviewed is his son, Merrick. Why was he not in this episode?
Howard, you want to...
Unfortunately, not an interesting answer. He's just shy. He like the family's been so great. I've been talking to them throughout the process, and Merrick just he's happy about the project, and he's happy to have his photo in there as a kid, but just doesn't. And that happens. We've had that a couple times where it's just that they camera shy or just private people, and that's what it is. But yeah, no animosity. He's really close with the family. The family they're so close and they're very loving people. But yeah, just didn't want to be involved.
Yeah, and one thing just about the family too, just to touch on it, is the real genesis of the episode, of course, started with Michelle Billington, who was amazing to work with on this episode. But the first person I talked to about doing a Dynamite episode was actually Martha Hart, Owen's widow. And she and I talked about the idea of an episode. She's like, have you ever thought about doing an episode about Tom? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And so then conversation started to evolve there, and she actually put me in touch with Brett's son, Dallas. And I texted Dallas, and he had told me he had seen the Owen episode and loved it, and he immediately called Michelle and said, "Hey, the guys that make Dark Side of the Ring want to talk to you about doing an episode about Dynamite." And Michelle was like, "Have them call me right like now." And so right away I called Michelle, and she said that she echoed the same sentiment about the Owen episode. And yeah, we must have spent an hour and a half on the phone just talking about what this would be and getting to know each other. And we were just like off to the races very, very, very fast on making this episode. And so we were just grateful to Martha, and of course, and the episode to have gotten us that opportunity.
It's cool to hear that based off your body of work that you've already done and people have been exposed to and watching the way that you've told the stories, that it's really resonated with people to say, oh, well, what about this story that you might want to do? That's when you're doing a really good job and people want to work with you and tell their story. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things we look forward to is, when a lot of the wrestlers or folks we interview, they have their ideas. Well, you ever thought about this or that, and
right.
And yeah, I mean, that's sometimes where the genesis of an episode can be, where someone, knows somebody else and they can put us over, and then there we go.
Yeah. Even when we were doing the Chris Benoit episode, Dynamite is someone that came up so many times, and so
totally
that, and people, everyone we interviewed would, reference Dynamite Kid. So he's just always there in our minds. And like Evan said, like our interview subjects will feed us stuff and ideas, and it will stick with us. And then once it comes time to develop other episodes, we're pulling those things out and developing them.
So you mentioned that Merrick was camera shy, didn't necessarily want to be a part of it for those reasons, but was there anybody that you interviewed for the episode that didn't make the final cut, or anybody that you wanted to interview you didn't get to?
Yeah. So, I mean, for people we wanted to interview, like the thing is a lot of Tom's friends from the business, and this happens, are just passed along, like they passed on. And so like he was really close with like Bad News Brown. He was close with a bunch of the Calgary people like Duke Myers and J.R. Foley, these interesting kind of people who did a lot of time in Stampede. Harley Race and him were very close. They got along really well. And just, so that is always a challenge of like, especially someone like Tom, who was very particular about who he was friends with and who he'd open up with. And there's not a lot of people that he was his true self around. And so luckily we got who we got. But one person he was very close with that we did interview is Wayne Hart, who's one of the unknown Hart brothers, I would say. One of the, he was a
Hart brother deep cut for sure. Yeah.
He was a ref in Stampede for most of the run and was involved in that, but just never really got in the business in a big way outside of Stampede. And he was basically recommended by, like, Julie said he was great. Michelle said he was great. Everyone like really bumped up Wayne because Tom and Wayne lived together for about a decade. Like they bought a house
That's
together.
wild.
Wayne still lives in the house that Tom and Wayne bought together. And like, they were so close when Tom first moved to Calgary. Like they were peas in a pod. And I mean, personally, we interviewed Wayne, and I believe he worked us. I believe he did not want to. I understand it. I think he did not want to give us the, like, not that we're looking for the dirt, but like
Sure.
the more interesting stories about their time together. Because basically, like, yeah, they lived together for a decade. We know some of the things that Tom Billington got up to. And
I feel strongly that saving money is important. You know, if it's not something we worry about now, boy, we are really going to worry about it later. And I want to help you get out of debt faster and do it with cheaper monthly payments. I'm talking to you if you're in a 30-year loan. Now is the time to take years off of your loan. We're routinely helping our listeners cut 5, 10, even 15 years off their loan. And you can do this without perfect credit with no money out of pocket. You've just got to start at savewithconrad.com.
The most crazy story he was willing to share with me was how, what was it? It was that one time Tom left a chicken cutlet out, and then the cat took it and ate it in the basement. And like,
Dark Side of the Ring.
Wayne, that's not Dark Side, pal. So you got to do better than that. 10 years.
And he had good, like, interest. And the thing is, Wayne, outside of Tom, had really interesting dynamic on his relationship with Stu Hart and the rest of the Hart family, and what it was like when the family would go to the WWF and he wouldn't see them. Like, there's a really separate episode that's very interesting. But he had one great thing about Tom, which was when Tom was eventually kicked out by Michelle and given the plane ride to the flight to London. He apparently Tom got in, like, was obviously mad, went to a bar, got into a huge fight, got beat up, black eye, bloodied, and then went to visit Wayne and just basically say goodbye. I'm probably never going to see you again. And that was a really interesting story, and really showed that clearly they had this deep friendship, but it was just not enough that we could, like, set it up properly.
But to also put over Wayne for 1 second, just so it's not it's not all a burial.
And Wayne was nice. Sorry, Wayne, great guy. I just very clear. I enjoyed my time with Wayne and talking with Wayne. It just, for the episode, but go on.
Yeah, no, but he something that you remarked to me at one point is that Wayne was kind of like, he was like the cool, like, he was kind of the cool Hart, like he was into Frank Zappa and, like, drugs, and, he was a cool, right?
Yeah,
Isn't that kind of like
the
hippie Hart?
Yeah, the black sheep of the family. And
yeah.
And that's what I was expecting, some, like, crazy fun party stories and ribs and stuff. And like he said that, like, when Davey first came over, Davey lived with them for like a week, but then couldn't deal with them just, like, drinking and smoking, and then moved in with Brett immediately, where it was a little bit more stable. But I think I bet there is some great stories, and that, he just didn't want to share them. And I understand that. And, it's, you can choose what you want to say.
Let's get into some of the guys that did want to be a part of this show and who you talked with. And the first I'll mention, Dan Spivey. Tell us about working with Dan.
Oh, man. Dan is awesome. I mean, my throat's not clear. Here we go.
We were trying to get the Dan Spivey voice down before you.
Oh yeah. Dumbass wrestlers. He's great, man. What a character. Oh my God. Yeah. I definitely want to put him in a movie after this, after the interview. But, he was great. And one of the things about, Dan, like when I heard, cause Michelle kind of, recommended a lot of folks for us that we should talk to. And when both Dan Spivey and Gary Ports, aka Scott McGee, came up, I was kind of surprised by those names because I hadn't really heard much about the closeness of those three. But when we interviewed Dan and Gary, they both told us about that they would travel in a crew together along with Davey Boy, but they were in a crew called the Night Patrol, which was basically what they would call their drinking rampages every night, where they would just go out, you close a bar down. And I think it's like really that those four guys were so close, or were close, and were friends because they could hang, with each other's level of drinking. That's kind of my interpretation, and then why they called themselves the Night Patrol. And of course they were sharing, steroids and who knows, God knows what else. But that was kind of their clique, but Dan was Dan was awesome in that, man, he had a really wild story that didn't make the episode. That was definitely in there at a certain point, but we definitely have a deleted scene of it. So you will see it, I think, at some point in time whenever we release those. But Dan told us a story where I think it was, Howard, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was after Tom had moved back to England.
Yeah.
After he had been kicked out, and Amaris was born, and he wrote that letter to Michelle saying, that he was going to come back to Calgary to meet, his daughter, but he never did. And on that trip, he actually went to Tampa, where Dan was living, to visit his his night patrol pal. And he goes to visit Dan, and they're hanging out drinking. And I from my recollection is that Dan started telling him about ecstasy, because this is in the 90s. Ecstasy is becoming a thing. And Tom's like, can you get me some? He wants to get his hands on some X, and Dan is able to arrange it. And I think there's this crazy night where Tom and some girl were in Dan's guest house, and they partied and did ecstasy. But then all of a sudden, Tom had a...
Just to interrupt, no, it happened very quickly. They didn't even get to the party.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, keep going. But yeah, Tom takes the ecstasy, and then half an hour later, go on.
Living up to the Mr. Fuji of Dark Side of the Ring right here. Knowing when the drugs are hitting. Okay. So Tom has a really bad reaction to the ecstasy, and instantaneously basically has an overdose and has a seizure.
Yeah.
And he's on the floor, and Dan panics. He gets alerted to it. He comes in, and he's resuscitating Tom. And there's a point where he's giving him mouth to mouth. And the ambulance comes, and they take him, and it's just so wild that this is all part of the same world here. But Scott McGee, AKA Gary Ports, he's working at a nurse. He's a nurse. He's working as a nurse at the hospital, right? Or not? Is that right?
I don't know if he was at the hospital. No, he wasn't working there. But he was a nurse at the time, so he was able to sneak into the hospital.
That's right. That's right. It's coming back to me. Yeah. So sorry. So Gary was a registered nurse and working, whatever. And so then they bring Tom to the hospital, and Tom, I think, calls Dan, and he's like, "You got to get me the fuck out of here," And so then they dress up Gary as in his nurse outfit, and he just walks into the hospital and wheels Tom out of the hospital. And they had to do it very carefully because they didn't want, whose drugs are these? Where, they were very paranoid about the drugs and didn't want it to come back on them in any way. So they had to, they thought, and Tom didn't want to be in the hospital, so they snuck him out of there, which is just wild. But
movie.
It is.
Yeah.
It was. And then the crazy thing is that it's just such a long story, to fit in the episode. But the other part of the saga is that Dan, I remember interviewing him and being like, "Hey, so you effectively saved your friend's life, because he did resuscitate him with the CPR." And he's like, "I never thought of it like that," And so it's just it hit him really hard in that moment that holy crap, he definitely probably could have been a chance that he died in that moment.
Yeah, he kept him alive until the paramedics could get there. It's crazy.
And he was high.
Oh yeah.
He's his trip is just beginning and is performing CPR on his friend. That is a nightmare.
Yeah, absolutely wild. And but Spivey, just to close the loop on Spivey, he also told us just wild stories of Tom antics, lots of rib stories. He told us that one of Tom's extracurriculars was speeding 80 miles an hour down the freeway, rear-ending people, and then he would rear-end people, and then they would stop. As soon as the person pulled over to be like, "What the fuck?" Then he would just speed off and take off. There was one time where, Tom just seemed like a reckless driver to the max. there was a time where there was like they were on the freeway and there was like these little divider medians, and Tom thought it would be neat to like drive up the medians to like get the car to stand on two wheels sideways, and he just was tearing down the highway like on two wheels on the side, and stuff. So like these guys were just like crazy, insane antics all the time. Night patrol, craziness, going wild, running wild. And
the wrestling action that didn't happen. The Night Patrol could be a T-shirt. My goodness.
Yeah.
It'd be so hard to hang with the Night Patrol.
Yeah.
So Tom lived outside the ring like he did inside the ring, wild with reckless abandon. And goodness.
My
well,
God.
Scott said that the only person who drank more than Tom was the Giant.
The Giant.
That's right. Everyone knows that reputation. And so like when you're comparing anyone to Andre the Giant and drinking, it's like, how much was he able to hold? Like, that's crazy.
And everyone's getting halcyoned. Everyone just imagining just like everyone getting H-bombed around you. Like nobody's safe. And there's even a time where it's like, I think it was Dan was like, and like he halcyoned me while I was driving, and it's like, what? Like, you're like, it's like crazy. These people have just like constant death wish.
The story of the one wrestler who got that treatment and then got his bag shit in and eyebrows shaved off. I mean, he was done. I'm done wrestling. I'm over it. I quit. That was a crazy story too.
There were a couple of them.
Snow.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a couple. I actually remember, it's hitting me now, back to our infamous Kim Wood interview. For the Brian Pillman episode, I think it's in Pillman's That Crazy Like a Fox book. And I think Kim was the one that told the story that there was another wrestler there that came through Calgary, that was subject to similar torment, from the Bulldogs, where this guy was, eyebrows shaved, halcyoned, eyebrows shaved, head shaved, painted yellow. There was a lot of painting things yellow too, which I noticed was another pattern. Painted the guy yellow, super glued his hands together, and chucked him out in the snow, I think overnight. So, I mean, that's insane.
Brutal. Yeah.
Brutal. I mean, and that's from Kim Wood. So, I mean, I don't know how it's like, if every detail is exact or that's a hybrid of different ribs, but yeah, I remember he told us that during his 15-hour interview.
Yeah, insane. That's enough to make me want to go back and look for a job at Walmart or something. So we talk about Dan Spivey. Let's move on. You mentioned his name, the nurse, Scott McGee. Was there any more stories that didn't make the final cut from Scott? He was pretty emotional in this episode.
Oh man, Scott McGee is one of my low-key favorite interviews of the whole season. Total surprise to me. Didn't really know much about him before making this episode. And just what a great storyteller, very emotional in the episode. Very, very dear friend to Tom's. And there was a lot of things that, just a lot of stuff about their relationship that unfortunately just we couldn't make the time for. But Scott suffered a stroke when he was in his 20s, I believe. Isn't that right? Late 20s or early 30s?
I think so, yeah.
Something around there. So he suffered a stroke, and that pretty much ended his wrestling career. And Tom, to show kind of a light side of Tom, he felt very bad for Scott. And I think, memory serves me right from the interview, he sort of took Scott in. I think this is when they were living in Calgary, and took him in and really was a big part of his rehabilitation in that. And of course, doing it in the most Tom Billington of ways. But he was like, "Here, Scott, here's a gun." And he gave him a gun and shot him. Shot him. I didn't mean to say that. Jesus Christ. No, taught him how to shoot a gun. And his, just teaching him how to shoot and target practice, and that coordination of firing a gun is actually what helped him in a lot of ways. But he was very emotional talking about Tom bringing him in. And then, of course, Scott, aka Gary, took Tom in when Tom had his really bad first debilitating back injury, because you hear about that as well, about, you know, when Tom's laying on the floor and you hear, you know, screaming in the night from the pain of, you know, what he was going through. So those guys were very, very close and shared a lot of just a lot in their life.
Yeah, he also shared stories about how like Dynamite could, you know, his temper could just be set off in like a second, and that was like kind of an intense thing to be around. Is that he could be fine 1 second, and then 2 seconds he could just like snap. And he did tell us a story that was in the cut that it didn't make it, but where one time they were at a club and Scott is like in the bathroom, and there's some guy in there who starts showing off to him and showing him, he's like flexing in front of him and just boasting in front of Scott. And Scott's kind of like laughing, having a good time with it. And then all of a sudden he just sees this guy like lift off the ground and go flying through the bathroom stall. And it was Dynamite, just like Tom just like knocked this guy out like into the bathroom stall. And then I guess he just like ran up to the guy and grabbed him by his like face and then just drove it into his knee like a bunch of times really fast. Like Scott described it just being like one of the more like violent things they've ever seen. And he busted this guy up and then offered Scott to put this guy's like head in the toilet and like flush his head in the toilet. And Scott McGee is just like, man, he's already been through enough, dude. Like this, you know, let it go. And then, so they went back to the club, and they're waiting for like the cops to like, you know, show up, and they don't. And Dynamite just starts like dancing on the dance floor, and he like looks over at Scott and he's like, man, like don't tell Michelle I'm dancing, because I've never danced before. And it was like this celebration dance of kind of getting away with this crazy act.
Yeah. And Howard, do you remember if that was after the Jacques Rougeau incident, or?
It probably would have been before.
It probably would have been before. Yeah. Cause I can't remember, because there's that one line that Scott McGee has in the episode where he's like, you know, and then he broke a few jaws after that, you know, and I can't remember if that was just related to the incident for New Year's Eve 91, but like, you know, he was on a tear of just, you know, taking out his aggression on anyone and everyone. And that was that guy was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yeah.
Well, he said to me that like when Dynamite wasn't able to get a hold of Michelle on a Friday night, he knew someone was going to get it. Like that was the thing. Like he would want to call Michelle when they're out on the road. And if Michelle didn't pick up for whatever reason, that would just set him off. And then it's like, he described like he would beat people up. Like it would be like a cartoon. People would fly through the air. That is the way that Dynamite would decimate strangers for no reason.
So you could imagine that somebody who routinely would do that, when they get their teeth knocked out, when someone clobbers them unexpectedly, sucker punches them, and then he's in a position, which I'm sure we'll talk about, to where he couldn't get the receipt on it. Someone who's got that many issues with his own masculinity, that's going to have an effect on that person's, for sure. You know, for sure.
Watching this and listening to this, it seems that there was never a name more apropos for a wrestler than Dynamite. This guy is just explosive in all walks of life.
Yeah, it almost is like a kind of like a walking explosive, and you don't know when it's going to set off.
And that's why we just went with the Dynamite Kid as the episode title. I remember that was like, we were just like, yeah, that describes it.
Yeah, self-implosion.
Yeah. Wrestling ring and in real life. So let's talk about that infamous night in Hamilton. He takes the knee in the back from Don Morocco. Really where the story picks up for all of you is where the injuries start, right, for him. Were there any other details on that regarding Morocco? Did he get heat from anyone? Did the family reveal any additional details or talk about Don in that situation?
Well, the injury, like that weird move, like very minor thing is what like set it off. But it was like he really hurt his back in Japan, which I think we have in the episode of him hitting the gate, like, or the fence.
Guardrail.
Okay.
And like the guardrail. Yeah. And it's just like, that is brutal. And like he was in horrible back pain before then. And then, whatever his body was doing, it finally set off on that in Hamilton. But no, I mean, no one was mad at Morocco, and no one, like, there was no retribution. Like, no, it wasn't even like a spot was missed or anything. It was really just it was his body saying no more.
Yeah, it was more of a freak accident that triggered based on what happened in previous experiences to his body. So that makes sense. So let's dig into it. Let's talk about what a lot of people want to hear a little bit more about, and that's the Rougeau story. His wife, Michelle, is not having any of it when you bring it up to her. Did it take additional prodding for her to open up about it? Because listen, this whole deal, it fundamentally changed their life for good.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say that, like, for Michelle doing this whole episode is something she wanted to do, but for one of the main reasons was there's been like 3 stories about Tom that are out there and that just get repeated. And it's like the shotgun thing with her. I can't remember what the second one is, but the third one is the Jacques Rougeau thing. And Jacques loves talking about her. He has told this story many, many times in many different fashions. He's a great storyteller. He knows how to tell it really well. And Michelle really was hesitant for us to include that because in her mind, it's been told before. It wasn't that important. It's not like the key thing. But I mean, I think that's partially because of how hard it was on Tom and how that did change him a bit. Or pushed him towards where he was going to be going. But yeah, it was just something that she's heard him talk about so many times, and he embellishes and he tells his version of the story. And because Davey's not around anymore, and Bad News, who was there, isn't around anymore, and a lot of the people who saw it go down and saw the inner workings, Mr. Perfect, who was involved, these people who can't tell their side of the story, it just becomes however Jacques wants to tell it. And that, I mean, we luckily got to explore a little bit further, and with the fake mob hit that affected the family. But yeah, it was just that it's a sore spot to hear him being so proud of telling this story of beating up the Dynamite Kid. And it just without any care to oh yeah, this really hurt him and his family and changed the rest of their lives.
Yeah, and I think that when you see Jacques in the episode kind of being very proud of the mob, the mafia hit situation, that's a hard moment, I think, for sure, or at least to a lot of folks. And I don't think that story has really been out there before. I know that was new to me. And I know when Conrad saw it too, he was like, that whole part, it was new to him as well. Just the whole Dino Bravo, stooge element of this whole story. And, just selfishly, I like how our show, when you look at it as kind of a TV series, take one step away from this, the real life wrestling stories. I like when other characters from our previous, episodes or seasons find their way back into the story somehow. Oh yeah, what's Dino Bravo been up to? And that's just wild. That whole thing. We had a whole episode exploring the organized crime connection, with Dino, and then to see it actually have such a huge. Yeah, it's a catalytic moment in a lot of ways. They had to sell their freaking house, and it's a major moment just because of that little weird story that made it so Dynamite never got the receipt, and God knows what that would have been like and where that would have put that family.
Yeah, and he didn't want to go back to WWE either because of it. So it's just that whole thing, and it's yeah, it is. Like you said, it is crazy, for, the whole mob world of Dino Bravo that we brought into it. And this effectively happens before, the world finds out about Dino's connections, to the mob. And it's interesting that it's Dino going to Dynamite Kid to say that Jacques is going to do a mob kind of thing, so it's it makes me want to even know more about the French connection, that's going on over
French
in Montreal,
connection.
Yeah. And the guys from Calgary and the guys from Montreal, it seems like there was, heat or, I don't, yeah, it's,
Well, you also brought up you also were bringing up the WWF.
Yeah.
And I knew that's where I could tell Howard where you were wanting to go. But yeah, I mean, Dynamite, I think, Michelle talks about how that was one of the reasons he didn't want to go back. But I do think Dynamite was pretty disenchanted with the just the WWF in general. I mean, isn't that sort of safe to say? Like he
didn't like it. He didn't like it. Rather be in Japan where he can make more money. He wouldn't have to travel as much. He was like so over, like he was over in the WWF, but in the WWF he was a babyface and he fucking hated being a babyface. Definitely, I would recommend people look up his promos. There's not a lot of them, but any promos in the WWF where he has to be like a lovable, happy guy, and he looks like he wants to kill everybody. He was so. There's like a good like ice cream.
He wants nothing to do with Matilda, is what you're saying.
I mean, that's a whole other thing.
That'll be an episode on its own.
Yeah,
whole other season.
He just like, and then if you watch, he in like 89, he goes back to Stampede and is like this monster heel against Davey Boy. And he's like doing these great promos as a heel. He's like really like figured that out. But when he's in the WWF, he's a good guy and he has to be nice all the time and has to be smiles. And that's not who he is. But then on top of that, to talk about Matilda, he's traveling around with a fucking dog. He has a dog.
Yeah.
He has those capes. Like I lifted those capes when, Bronwyn and Amaris brought them. They are heavy. They are not things that you can't lose them. You have to keep them clean. And like you're traveling all the time, no days off, and you have all this shit with you. And it adds up. Like Michelle told me, like when she would be on the road, they would be all you would see is the airport, the arena, the hotel, the gym, and maybe the laundromat. And that's it. And you're just always traveling. You're always moving. And again, you have a dog, you have a bunch of your gimmicks with you, and you have to be happy. If anyone sees you, you can't be the Dynamite Kid. You have to, at the very least, like try to get away from it. But like you can't like yell at children, which I think is what he'd prefer to be doing.
Yeah, or punching them. Yeah.
Yeah. But
that poor fucking dog is all I wanted to just say. Yeah. Jesus Christ.
Drop a story, one at least for this one about, because you guys said that could be a whole nother episode.
I've just like heard, I've heard several times from wrestlers that they'll refer to that dog and be like, yeah, Matilda did more drugs than any of the wrestlers.
Yeah. Yeah. Like everyone has their Andre story and then everyone has their Matilda story. I feel like that we've interviewed, I don't know.
They fed the dog a lot of hot dogs. That was, you're not getting dog food in every city and figuring it out. So it's just like, when you feed dogs food that they're not supposed to be eating, disasters tend to happen.
I've heard like wrestlers who would try to rib, Davey Boy and Tom by feeding the dogs shit that it
XLX.
That it would make this shit all over their hotel room,
Yeah.
And actually, to get back to the Rougeaus, this whole element kind of leads to one of the reasons not only they were disenchanted with the WWF, but why they hated the Rougeaus, or why there was this animosity. And it was that they had no time off. I think it was like 3 days a month or whatever it was, very little time off. And to get home to Calgary, that was connecting flights. And that was like, you basically lose one of your days. And if you're at the top of the card, then you have even less time to get home because you might miss your connecting flight, or you have to like travel to the airport. And the Rougeaus, who lived in Montreal, is a lot easier to get to. And Tom always thought, because they had an in with Pat Patterson, that the Rougeaus were able to get to the top or the front of the card, the first match of the night, so they can do their match, go home, and get home way sooner. Where if Davey Boy and Tom could do that, if they were able to get the first match of the night, they'd be able to make the flight. They'd get to spend more time with their family, but they never were allowed to. And that kind of was like a simmering thing for Tom, of like them getting this preferred treatment, and Tom and Davey Boy having to wait. And then they get a day off in Calgary with their family, and that's it.
And also one of the things you don't really see in the, because we had to truncate that story for the episode, but because it is a very convoluted story. There's a lot of elements going into play to, understand all of the facets of that moment. But Pat Patterson was also standing right next to Dynamite, when he got sucker punched as well. And so there was a feeling too that, perhaps maybe Pat was, sort of, right. I mean, he was sort of like, what do you call it? He was kind of in on it a little bit.
Yeah. Like that, and people have said that another big thing, which you kind of see him in Recre, but we don't really, I think Jacques mentions him once, but we had to cut him out there also, is Mr. Perfect, who pretty much, it's pretty clear, was the reason this all happened. Like the story is that he would, because one of the big ribs they all did was like they would cut their like clothes. Like you'd have your match, you'd come back and your clothes would be all cut up and ripped and whatever. And actually, sorry, very quickly to go back to last week, there is a story that I think Dan Spivey told us about how one time Tom did that gimmick or that rib to Grizzly Smith. And Grizzly would travel with a shotgun with him and basically threaten Tom with a shotgun, which we didn't include in the episode. But, again, episodes all coming together.
Worlds collide.
Yeah. But anyways, Mr. Perfect did that to Jacques, but made it seem like, he did that to Tom. He cut his clothes up, but made it seem like it was Jacques who was responsible. And that's why when we talk about the card game where like Mr. Perfect is like, has his back behind at the wall. Yeah. He wants to see what's about to happen for this whole thing that he sets in motion. Cause he liked to just see what would happen with people. Stir
some shit.
Yeah.
Yep.
Makes total sense, though, now as to why he would come over and whack him in the head like that. So there you go. Good stuff. Real quick, closing down the Jacques story here. He then, while you guys are interviewing, has this moment of recollection right here live as you're interviewing him, right? About the phone call. And if I don't call at night, then, take them out. Did Michelle know anything about this story? Is this just made up on the fly? Is this Jacques, again, just trying to embellish and be more of a storyteller since he's on camera? What do you guys think about that revelation, if you will?
Well, I seem to remember that Michelle, we interviewed her first and she told us about it first. So, right. So then we were like, Jacques, is this true? Like, did you, what do you know about this Dino thing? Cause I remember Michelle, the first phone call I had with her, she told me that on the phone that they were terrified, or she was specifically, about Dino Bravo related retaliation if Tom were to do something insane back to Jacques, that, it could really, hurt her and their children. And so, yeah.
Yeah, no, he, Jacques, that was like, that person didn't exist. There was no one Jacques was going to call. It was all like, it was a bluff, but the bluff worked because for years and years, they were worried that someone might come and kill them. Like, Tom bought her a gun to protect herself. Like,
think about uprooting your whole family, moving. I mean, that's a big deal. And to always have that as you lay your head down to rest every night, someone could be after our family. That's a lot of pressure and just wild to live under that.
And did she know that it was a work, or is this like the episode itself is what reveals that Jacques was? I
don't think she knew it was a work. I think that
I'm not sure.
I'm not exactly sure, but I think in the moment it definitely wasn't, because they uprooted themselves.
Yeah.
But that's what caused them to. It affected their lives in a major way.
So you talk about they move. He wants to quit WWF. What can you tell us about the British Bulldogs breakup?
Oh, yeah. Well, there was a time period. Howard, do you remember exactly that there was like, I don't remember the exact event, but there was a time where they kind of went their separate ways. I think maybe was it after Tom was kind of out of action for a while?
So after WWF, they go back to Calgary because Stampede had reformed, and there's some that's when Brian Pillman's there. Like that 1989 Stampede stuff is pretty cool. There's some like really good shit they were doing there. Owen Hart's there for a little bit. But anyways, they go to Japan. Well, they went to Calgary, but then we're doing these Japan tours, making a ton of money. And then at a certain point, it was Davey Boy wanted to go back to the WWF. He didn't want to do Japan anymore. And they had this falling out. And I can't remember the exact time. I think it might have been while he was still in Calgary. I don't know off the top of my head, but they basically had a falling out. And Davey Boy actually asked Dynamite I think Owen asked if he could be the be the next British Bulldogs with Davey Boy. Like they went up to Tom, Davey Boy and Owen Hart being like, can we be the British Bulldogs? And then Tom said yes. And then apparently was like furious that he said yes, and it never happened. But that's a little thing that someone mentioned.
Yeah. And then I think it was that Tom in his book claimed that Davey Boy trademarked the name or something. And cause he kept obviously using the name, the British Bulldog into his career. And there was a lot of animosity between Davey Boy and Tom after that. And I believe that they never really reconciled before Davey Boy passed away. So that went all the way, unfortunately, to the end there. And they obviously were so close.
And Harry did. Like, there's photos people can see online of him, like Davey Boy's son, with Dynamite before he passed away. And so he visited him like Bronwyn did. And so they kind of formed a connection. But it broke up. That's and they never reconciled.
That actually, now that you mentioned Harry, that just I just remembered something too. Is one of the things that we considered for this episode as well was actually interviewing Tiger Mask, Satoru Sayama. Yes. And Harry was in touch with him at one point as well. And so I remember reaching out to Harry and being like, hey, like, we'd love to get the original Tiger Mask in the episode, because there's this really emotionally gut-wrenching, devastating video out there on YouTube where right before Tom passes, he's pretty much at the end of his life, and just a few years ago. And I think Tom's widow, his second wife, puts Sayama on a like FaceTime, and Sayama is talking to Dynamite and trying to get him to recollect their matches, and it's really just heartbreaking, because obviously Tom's just, he's totally out of it. But we thought it might be really emotional and cool to be able to get him for the episode to talk about the matches, because Tom, always, everything goes back to those set of matches with Tom. Yeah. I mean, you hear that moment when, after his injuries, he invites Julie Hart over and they watch his matches. I gather from the end of his life, when he was in his wheelchair in his home, he watched those matches all the time. So another heartbreaking aspect is that he's just reliving his glory years over and over and over again. And just this like Shakespearean level of, sort of just tragedy that like, and kind of unthinkable, is that here's a guy, in a wheelchair before 40 and just kind of having to sit and live with a lot of the ways he led his life, for years. That's kind of what it was like for him. So yeah, that was another thing that you just mentioned, Harry. I forgot that we really did try to get Tiger Mask, but I think he said no. I think he declined, actually.
He's had some health issues in the last year or so, and it was like, we
that could be.
And so it was complicated, and yeah.
One of the other guys that you did get for this was Mick Foley. So we have not seen him on Dark Side of the Ring for a little while. But if you've known and read or listened to Foley, I think he even tweeted it. For him, the Dynamite Kid was on his Mount Rushmore of top wrestlers of all time. Talk about involving Mick in this.
Yeah, I remember when I did speak to Bronwyn for the first time. After I spoke to Michelle, Bronwyn was an early conversation I had, and she's amazing. She's just great, and she has a huge passion for wrestling. Still to this day, I think she does some work with a local wrestling fed up there in Calgary. So she's super plugged in, has a huge love for it, Mick being the guardian angel of wrestling, the amazing man that he is, he developed a close relationship with, Mick did, even though we explore that story in the episode where Dynamite basically dislocates his jaw, him and Tom did form a little bit more of a connection later on in Mick's career, and Tom and Mick got along. And so after Tom passed away, he reached out to Bronwyn, and they sort of developed a friendship. And so the Billingtons basically asked us, like, hey, do you think we could interview Mick? And I was like, no problem, and I've called up Mick, and he was more than happy to be a part of it. And that's when I kind of learned that Dynamite was such a huge influence on Mick. I didn't really know that. I guess maybe he talks about it in one of his books, but I didn't really, you don't really associate like somebody with this, like, perfect technical prowess and, like that sort of level of athleticism being something that would be, part of, being influenced to Mick, but it certainly was. And he was, obviously we love Mick on the show. I mean, Mick is like ground zero for Dark Side of the Ring in a lot of ways, because, he was our original narrator. And, Yeah, he was explaining his Rushmore, which I have in front of me here. If anybody wants to know what Mick Foley's Rushmore is, it is Terry Funk, who's also on mine. Bruiser Brody, probably on mine. Ric Flair, and then Dynamite Kid. So that's his Rushmore. And and then obviously, he talked about the Tiger Mask matches being just such a profound effect on him, as he was coming up in the business, soaking up all the knowledge and, all the best of wrestling at the time. And it was just great to have him, to have that first person perspective of his encounter with the Bulldogs when he was, jobbing in the WWF. But also just to kind of see and experience Dynamite's trajectory from someone who is part of the business, but also there's a lot of similarities between the self-sacrificing style that they both have, for the sake of their art or for their careers. And Mick, I do remember telling me that, and I think he actually tweeted about it just now as we were recording this, but he was talking about how, and last night he told me after he watched it that it was a really difficult, hard watch for him emotionally. And I think that a lot of Mick Foley's peers in the business, and you learned this from his A&E special just a few weeks back, which I thought was fantastic, by the way, but had talked about that a lot of those guys thought he was going to wind up in a wheelchair before 40. A lot of people thought he was on that path, of just putting his body on the line to such extremes, unnecessary extremes, to many ways, and that was the POV of some folks. So I think that Mick always looked at Dynamite as a cautionary tale for his own career, but obviously still threw caution to the wind and did what he was going to do anyway. But I think it haunted him a lot to see where Dynamite wound up and having that image in his head as he's doing the things that he's doing. Like, this could be me. I could be in a wheelchair, broken down alone and have to deal with that, and my family's going to have to deal with that as well. So I think that's always been this kind of thing. And so I think that he really also, but on the flip side, Mick also really understands that sort of suffering for your art and going the extra mile to get the attention, and that also being part of your performance and part of your repertoire and your art. And so I think it is cool to hear when he touches on that in the episode, because, and at first I was like, wow, Mick Foley for a Dynamite Kid episode. But then when you really think about it, maybe one of the only other wrestlers who really understands the plight of Tom in the ring could be Mick. He's one of the closer related, self-sacrificing guys. I mean, no doubt.
Yeah, no, you talk about Bromwell a little bit. And one of the things that stuck out to me, guys, because there wasn't a whole lot of Dynamite Kid or Tom connecting emotionally with people. But at the beginning of the story, Bronwyn shares how that as a young girl, it was a sign to her how much he loved her by how tight he would squeeze her hand and hold her hand. Then we get to the end of the episode when she goes to visit him and she pulls up a chair beside him. And again, they're holding hands when he says, "I'm sorry." And to me, that was just one element of an emotional connection, which we didn't see often, if at all, from Dynamite Kid, that I thought was powerful, and one that she'd share kind of her own way throughout that episode.
He loved Bronwyn. Like that, the story we didn't get in there is that he loved spoiling her. He bought her, like, he was, I don't know, 3 or 4, and she wanted a pony for her birthday. So he bought her a pony. Like, he literally just, and like, they didn't know how to have any experience owning a pony. Like, they had to give it to their neighbor who could have the pony. But he just she's a little girl saying, "I want a pony, daddy." And then he brought her a pony. Like, that was, he clearly cared a lot about her and Merrick. And then it's a little bit more complicated with Amaris just because of the distance. But he clearly loved his children. And then just, there were so many other things going on that kind of got in the way of it.
But also sorry, Jason, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I feel a lot for her just because, like you were saying, she talks about seeing those photos with him holding her hand, and it's like, you're to have to, have a relationship with your father by just looking at photos, and then she, got the courage to go and, without him knowing, and go visit him, and get some closure in her own life. And yeah, it's just, it's just, yeah, it's really powerful, really brave for her to have been able to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, and very relatable too. And I think I remember when she told me that story, because I was not familiar with that when I spoke to her that had happened, that she had kind of taken it upon herself to go over there. And it's just another facet to, there's so much to this story, you know, and that to me is such an amazing, like you can't write it kind of moment where, you know, she is going to be a part of his life and make that, and you know, it's not up to him anymore. Now it's going to be up to me. And I think that is heartbreaking in a lot of ways. But then, you know, I think she did tell us too, that it was hard to connect with him at first. But they did share, you know, that moment at least, you know, and I think that you know, meant a lot to her, of course. Seeing the things that she saw, as she talks about in the episode, but being able to come full circle is sort of, is just an event, and that doesn't really get to happen in a lot of cases, you know, with similar types of stories like this. So, you know, I think that it's amazing that happened.
It's what's amazing to me is that all three kids, seeing what they saw, witnessing what they witnessed from the shotgun to the mom's head, her being pregnant and the whole 9 yards, all the ugly stuff that they saw from their dad, their love for him, and still to this day, came through loud and clear as they told the stories on this show.
Yeah, and that's one, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one thing I did really want to talk about, because it took me by surprise at first, you know, because I do remember the CNN expose after the Chris Benoit, you know, double murder suicide. I remember, watching that. And then when, you know, Michelle comes on talking about the shotgun story, it's just like the most horrifying thing you've ever heard. And when we were considering this, before we talked to Michelle, before we talked to Bronwyn, you know, I was thinking of it like, this is just going to be kind of a story about, you know, what everyone survived, which they did, you know, but it was going to be more, it wasn't going to be, there wasn't going to be that love there, you know, which is tangible in the episode. So that took me by surprise. And that made me really learn a lot about, for myself, the sort of complexity of relationships, you know, because when Michelle says that, you know, she didn't, you know, she loved him, she still loved him, but she didn't love what was going on. But, you know, there obviously was a lot of abuse that was happening in the home. And I think that there is that sort of, and obviously I wasn't there, and, you know, I haven't experienced that in my own shoes, but, you know, I think that there is a degree to it where, you know, there's still something where, you know, she wants to protect him, and she feels like she wants to protect him still to this day. And I think that was tangible in her interview, where she, you know, I think when you hear her kind of downplaying the events that happened between them, I think there is still that complicated relationship between both of them. And I think that's very real. You know, I think that to me showed that, you know, where I could see somebody else watching this and judging her for that. But I think until you walk in those shoes and you know how complicated it really is, but also that that's real. That's real life to me is that. And still having to deal with this, even 20, what are we, almost 30 years after? Yeah, 30 years they split up, you know, dealing with that. And it's still something that you're reckoning with on your feelings on this person. They did all these horrible things to me, but there's still something there, you know, and that to me is like I said, real life.
And I think it's also challenging. A big thing with her that is challenging is that she just sees people bashing him and that's it. And they like, he's this monster, he's terrible. And she really finds that, like, you know, they were all doing bad things too. And like, obviously not the shotgun, but like his contemporaries were, you know, beating their wives. They were doing horrible pranks on other wrestlers. And to her, in her perspective, it's just like everyone else gets a pass except for Tom. Tom is only remembered for the horrible things he did, and no one knows. And again, this is the father of her children, and they had like so much of their relationship was good until it wasn't. And that doesn't excuse the horrible things that he did, but it's still like, it's so much more complicated than he held a shotgun to her head and he did these other things. It's just, they worked together for years and years and years. And it's more than just that. And that's what she really wanted to get out there.
And you also hear too, like after, when the CNN piece airs, or right before she does the interview, she goes to her kids and has to explain to them what the real story is. So I think she had also years and years and years of protecting their children from the things that really went on in the house. And so I think that there is still a little bit of that, with her, or at least that's what it seems like to me when I watch it back. But yeah, she does not want his, for lack of a better term, like his legacy canceled. She wants the in-ring legacy to continue on. And I think her children do too. Is that safe to say? Yeah.
100%. That was kind of one of their main things of doing the episode, is that people can recognize. And I think that was kind of what we put together, is that he was a complicated person. He did some truly terrible things, but like, he was one of the greatest, if not the greatest wrestlers of all time. And you can still, and I mean, that's what we end with Mick on that note of just like, you should still be able to acknowledge that. Well, that doesn't take away from the horrible things he did.
Right. Yeah. You guys, especially in this season and through the series, have really had to talk a lot to folks about trauma, in this case, domestic violence. Is there a way to prep going into this? When people are retelling you all this, how does it take a toll on you guys? Like, what is that like for you as you're kind of being unloaded upon, hearing these stories?
Well, definitely. I mean, there's been a lot of times over the years with Jason and I, doing the first few seasons, that just like, you're hitting the road, you're on the road for 30 days and at a time. And then, you're kind of sitting opposite to family members and wrestlers who are reliving some of their most traumatic times and darkest times. And it does. I remember after the Owen episode, I think the Owen one was the one that just hit me the hardest, because I had a connection with Owen, obviously, as a fan, but just empathizing with the family and just like, it was so sad and dark. And I just remember that really making, having a huge impression on me. But, Howard, you did a lot of the interviews for this episode in particular, or at least with the family. So, tell us about that.
You can attest to that. These last 2 weeks, I was very close with some of the Smith family, with Robin specifically, and now with all the Billingtons. And these have weighed heavy on me of just like, we're not trained how to deal with these things, or how to and also the most important thing is like, not just me dealing with it, but letting them know that my intention is to tell your story as honestly as I possibly can and get that out there. But knowing we have 44 minutes, like my interview with Michelle was 4 hours, I want to say. And like, we went deep into her background and deep into and that's one thing I just really want to talk about, is that Michelle, came from like very like broken home, foster care. She came and like, she told me that like, she didn't want her family. And that's one of the reasons she stayed with Tom for so long, is she came from a broken family and she didn't want that for her kids. And she was willing to do anything she could to keep that family together until it became too much. But then also after, when he did leave, she basically was starting from scratch. They got married at 18 and she was now a mother of 3 kids, a newborn, and she didn't have a high school education and she had to like go to night school. She's now a teacher and like raise 3 kids. And so like, in my perfect world, I have all that in the episode. We can tell Michelle's full story as well as everything else, but we are one of the few shows left that have to hit 44 minutes. We are on cable. We have to hit network times. And that means like, Robin Smith last week, we could do 2 hours on her interview alone, but we don't have the time for that. And it's tough to know, like Evan can tell you how I was stressed this last while before we showed the families the episodes, like being like, they're going to hate it. They're going to be furious at me. Michelle's going to want to kill me. And that's like, it weighs a lot.
Yeah.
Big time. I found it too a lot, like, through because we have to do so many episodes and such a short amount of time, and you want to give everyone, the emotional care that you can. And this becomes tough, but I feel like what we do is we try to like Howard said, tell the truth, give them an opportunity to tell their story, and then just, you know, creating kind of like a safe space so that they feel that they can, you know, be open to us. And, you know, we just try to, you know, be there for them during those things and during the interviews. And I don't know, it's it can take its toll, especially when there's like just so much like tragedy. Yeah.
Sure.
That, you know, you're also like processing as well. Like I remember, because on season 1, season 2, I was editing a lot, and you're just like, and you know, you're there for the interviews, and then you're editing the episode, and then you're hearing the stories over and over again. There'd be times where I would just like, I remember on the Owen Hart episode, like I would just like times just like break down, like crying, you know, like just the reality of it and the emotion of it, and then like the stakes of having to tell this story and do it justice, you know.
Oh yeah, that's another one thing. Yeah,
like it just that becomes like a toll. But then I also like I get inspired so much from everyone. It's almost like I feel like I've, like, heaven forbid any like, you know, real crazy tragedies strike my life, but I feel like maybe I can be more equipped to deal with things, or even like just like how we've seen a lot where people have had struggles with their.
I get it. It's a wrestling podcast, but he's saving us money on our mortgage. Do you really trust this process? The reviews don't lie. 5-star review after 5-star review. We make it fast, we make it easy, and it's no cost or obligation. Give us a shot to earn your business. I'm telling you, you'll be glad you did, especially if you like keeping more of your own money. You don't need perfect credit or money out of your pocket, so what are you waiting for? Hurry to savewithconrad.com.
With their own family and their own relationships and whatnot, you know, kind of like what Evan was saying, like we're dealing with like real life. And I think that gives me a lot of perspective on things, and I can deal with things in my life, I think, a little bit more now. Like I have more tools because I've learned so much from our subjects.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. And not to, you know, dust off the tiny violins for sympathy, but the, you know, yeah, there, like what you said, there is a pressure too, because, you know, you have a rabid fan base, you know, that's very vocal, very entitled. Starting to turn on wrestling fans this season a little bit.
I can hear that.
And the Ultimate Warrior week is definitely making me want to turn heel a little bit. But you know, and there is that pressure, you know, to because, you know, we want to please everybody. You know, we want wrestling fans to you know, like the show and the stories, but we also engineer the show not for that audience. You know, we're not like, if we just made the show that most wrestling fans would want to see, it wouldn't be palatable necessarily for that sort of more that like a crossover audience, you know, like we want people to be enraptured by the emotional family stories that are in this world. And that to us is what this is the most interesting aspect to it too. It's not necessarily like I've gone on in this podcast before about belts and dates. You know, you got your belts and dates folks out there who need their belts and their dates.
Yeah,
you know,
I saw last night there was a couple comments where they wanted to know more about when Dynamite or when the Bulldogs won the belts, and it's like,
yeah. Well, and that's like a lot of our first cuts are like that. Our early cuts are all like you can
belts
see
and dates.
Yeah, and like our like one of our series producer Barry Davis will say like it's the back of the hockey card. It's and then showing how Canadian we are, and it's that you see the back of the hockey card, and it's like he was on this team for there. He scored that many goals, and that's what the first pass of our episodes almost always are going to be like that. And then we're like, well, if we include that, we can't tell this really personal, amazing story that gets to the core of who this person is. And it's like, I can talk about him having a big match at SummerSlam, or we can talk about the time that he hugged his daughter for the first time.
Yeah, I know. And yeah, for me, when we see the first cuts of any episode, it's like, get rid of the belts, get rid of the dates. Those are the first things that go. And yeah, it's just, it's not, you know, they're not career focused stories. And anytime that we flirted with the idea, in previous seasons of getting too into the career, I always regret it, because it kind of is that like dangling a carrot, you know, in front of the belt and date folks of like, oh, we're going to start talking about belts and dates here, you know, and then they expect more belts and dates to be talked about. But yeah, for me, it's like, that's just like the least interesting aspect of anything that we talk about on our show is a belt or a date. And I think that unless it has directly to do with the human story, like what comes to mind, the Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, WrestleMania 20. That obviously is a belt and a date that has a lot to do with where that story would go. But no.
That's not what the narrative that we're looking for. I can speak as a fan for Dark Side of the Ring. We want the stories. We want the emotion. We want the real life. Okay. So
I can see some belts back there, though.
I do have some belts, but I won't share any dates. But yeah. But hey, listen,
a couple belts back there.
Nothing like Conrad, but a couple. But hey, I was going to say
too many belts.
I was going to say, Howard, thank you for sharing about what you just did, that tidbit about Michelle's background, because there had to be a lot of people watching this episode saying, why did she not leave? But your explanation of how she was brought up and why she fundamentally was grounded in her, rooted in her, I will not have the same thing happen to my family, explains a lot. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem. And she was great. Like 4 or 5 hour interview. We really got into her whole story. And she had a pretty traumatic story. And even meeting Dynamite, initially, Julie, her sister, was with Brett and everyone was super kayfabe, wasn't telling, when she first started dating Tom, everyone, she believed Tom was a bad guy and was genuinely hated Brett. And Julie, who was dating Brett, thought that was the case. And so it's just their whole relationship is this weird mixture of wrestling and reality and trauma. And it just never really ends.
So I have one more question before we put a bow on this episode here. And when we talk about trauma, there's one story I'm really looking for here. My question is there anything additional to this story that didn't air, but you can share with us today? And I think I know the story that we're talking about here. Is there, can you share that one with us in terms of the hammer?
That's the insurance, the breaking of the legs, the insurance deal. Right. Yeah. I believe, if memory serves me correct, that it was Diana Hart's book where that originated from.
That's correct.
Right. It was a story about Dynamite, and it was J.R. Foley's daughter.
Yeah.
Right. Allegedly, there was an insurance situation where, I can't. Howard, do you remember the circle? Was it like a hit and what was the?
He got into some sort of car accident, but seemingly they weren't going to get insurance money for it. So J.R. Foley asked Dynamite to break his daughter, J.R. Foley's daughter, her legs so they could get this insurance money, which would have been a pretty substantial thing. And he did it. And it's this kind of one of those wrestling legendary, horrifying stories. But yeah, to be perfectly honest, I asked Bromwell and Amaris about it because it came up and they basically were we've heard the story. We have nothing to say to the story. We don't really want to focus on it.
I got you.
And no one else was the people who were involved in it have all passed away. So we don't really try to avoid as much as we can those this is a story I heard, unless it really I was not there, but this is what happened. And
need more validation.
Yeah. And then Tom did talk about it on, I think what's the movie, documentary, the High Spots one called? I
can't remember. Anyway, I'll find it. Go ahead.
Yeah. The High Spots documentary they did where they basically just interviewed him when he's in England and in the wheelchair. And he basically, the guy asked, it's on YouTube. There's a story where you broke J.R. Foley's daughter's legs. Is this true? And he just says, yep. And that's it. That's the entirety. And it's we could have put in narration where we explain it and a recreation and then that line. And it's just it wouldn't have any emotional points. Right. It just would have been there because it's a thing fans want to hear. And if we had gotten this incredible firsthand story, it would have been in there, but we didn't.
Matter of Pride is the name of the High Spots documentary.
I do just want to bring up, because I just mentioned the recreations, that I think there's some incredible recreations that Jason did in this one, and the wrestling specifically. We got our Tiger Mask and our Dynamite to do those moves, and I don't know if you have any.
That was cool. No, just Adam Hutchinson, who played Dynamite Kid. He's a wrestler who I think was heavily inspired also by Dynamite Kid. And so the opportunity.
He's British.
He's British. He wanted to play it so bad. But he never acted before. And so he put in the extra work to do all these audition tapes, and he sent them in and was just so passionate. And yeah, he did a great job. And same with, what's her name? Brianna, D'Alvilla. She played Michelle And, there's some harrowing reenactment scenes there, where we showed some of the domestic moments, and they both handled it so well and so professionally, and with the kids that we had like in the scenes, and to be able to pull that stuff off while, making it, to make it not like a traumatic experience like on set, and
one of the heavier things you had to shoot.
Yeah. Definitely, yeah. It was definitely a little nerve-wracking shooting it, but everyone was so like pro about it. But I think it'd be great also to give a big shout out to Robert Hyland and Curtis Love for editing the episode. They did an incredible job on this one.
And Jerome, our story editor.
Yeah, Jerome Skeet, he's awesome. He's working super, super hard right now on the XPW episode, getting that together for the second half of the season. But Jerome did an amazing job. Yeah, Kurt and Rob both cut this episode, and they did an amazing job, like you said. Howard did a great job doing interviews with the Billingtons, and Wayne Hart. You did a great job with
and Lance Storm. Oh, and we can't just, so for all the fans, I know they're looking for me in this episode because I was so many characters in the last one. I'm only in one shot. I'm the ref who lifts up Dynamite's hand. So you'll see there's a GIF I saw was made of it, so you can see that. Not my best performance, but it's up there.
It doesn't. It didn't hit the resume yet, but hey, it might shortly. That's good.
Well, in these last ones, I have a couple roles I'm looking forward to.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, listen,
we got to do. Just going to say by the end of this season, we got to do the supercut of all the Howard performances.
There you go. The highlight.
The reel. You got to get. We can put your reel together for you, and then we got to get the dog supercut going. Everybody's dogs. Sure,
that's the best. Oh, and just one more shout out because this was Stu Stone's first episode that he helped us out on because he interviewed the Jacques Rougeau interview.
That's right. Yeah, Stu Stone came aboard the show right around the time we were working on the Dynamite Kid episode. Stu, you might know from he's actually one of the kids in Donnie Darko. So
the voice of Ralphie on the Magic School Bus.
He's the guy dressed as Hulk Hogan in Donnie Darko.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So Stu Stone came aboard this journey. I'm sure we're going to have him on this podcast. That's why I'm trying to give him an introduction here. Stu came on as a field producer when we were just right in the middle of production, like crazy. And we just couldn't be everywhere at once. So he actually hit the wrestle road for us and did a bunch of interviews for the rest of the season. Awesome job. And we worked with him super close. And so I'm sure you'll hear him at some juncture on this show.
Yeah. But we gotta bring him for the next set of episodes for sure.
Yeah. But he grew up a humongous wrestling fan. And then it was like, all right, here you go. You got to interview Johnny K-9's wife. And then you got to, go over here to Jacques Rougeau, and it was blowing his mind, and but he did a great job.
Well, guys, listen, we heard the news last night. You've already mentioned it here today. The second half of season 3, Dark Side of the Ring, picks up in September on Vice. And listen, the first part of this season's been very heavy. You think about Pillman, you think of Grizzly Smith, and then who we just talked about, Dynamite Kid. What should we expect from the second half of season 3?
Second half kind of gets into definitely gets into some deeper cut stories. I feel like it's we got FMW as a story, probably my favorite wrestling promotion of all time, and that story. I mean, interviewing Onita and just the exploding rings and the electrified pool matches. There's a lot there that's totally wild and crazy. The Johnny K-9 / Bruiser Bedlam story. I mean, it's harder to get more deep cut than that, but a very, very compelling hour of television with a lot of amazing interviews. Probably our best reenactments, I'd say. Incredible. Dare I say our best reenactments in that episode? I mean, it's like a full-on action movie. There's fucking SWAT teams and biker gangs and fucking walls exploding. It's crazy. It's probably the most epic thing we've ever done for the show, I feel like, is the Johnny K-9 reenactments of all things.
Yeah.
There is, let's see, the XPW story I mentioned earlier, which is just oh my God. Yeah. I don't know. Like
it's,
deathmatch wrestling meets the porn industry meets like Ozfest meets
The conversations we have about that episode are and like my search history has just been like decimated by working on that episode.
I think Howard's on like, well, I guess you're in Canada. I was going to say you're probably being tracked by the FBI, but I guess I don't know what your
the Mounties.
The Mounties. That's right. The Mounties have you on their radar now from your search history on XPW.
Speaking of yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That episode's absolutely insane and debaucherous, but also I know we've been rolling long here, but we should also say we haven't really talked about it on the pod, but RIP New Jack, which was just absolutely shocking and devastating news to us when we heard it. But this is New Jack's last interview, is in that episode. So we will hear from New Jack in the XPW episode. What else we got? We got the steroid trials, which is an episode that I cannot wait for because it features us interviewing Jerry McDivitt, which is a wild, surreal thought from the if you were to think about that from the first season.
Plane Ride from Hell, right?
Yep. Plane Ride from Hell, yeah, definitely. Plane Ride from Hell is strap in. Probably one of the more intense episodes you're gonna see from Dark Side for sure. That one's definitely keeping me up at night.
Chris Canyon. Oh my God.
Chris Canyon. If you do not cry during the Chris Canyon episode, you are not human. And I
just said yesterday in an email that the end of that episode, the closest I feel like I've come to like a feeling that emotion is when I would watch our Owen Hart episode 400 times. It was like, there's a moment at the beginning of Owen Hart that got me every single time with his kids, and the end of Chris Canyon, every time I watch it, I'm just a mess. Yeah. So it's that's going to be huge. And then Luna Vachon, which is an incredible one, and some really great interviews, and can't wait for people to see that.
Yeah. Awesome stuff with Luna. Just, the Kevin Sullivan, click there with her, and then her rise to the WWE, and her relationship with Gangrel and everything. It's just it's an awesome episode. I'm so glad we did it. So yeah, a lot to look forward to. But I saw it there in the Twitterverse last night. A couple of those Belton daters out there who were like, we gotta wait. And it's like, yeah, you're gonna have to wait because there was a global crisis. We had to make 14 hours of the show. Putting our lives at risk. And, this is one of the ways we were able to make it happen and to get the show on the air as quickly as possible to sort of mirror last year's schedule. The only way we could really do that is by kind of breaking it up into two sections. So you could have the first part, but then it's going to be a short break so you can have more. And then, fingers crossed, if there's a season 4, you'll have to wait even less, so it actually does. It is nice for that. But the Belton daters were definitely not happy.
Listen, this isn't the first show to have the first half at the beginning and then the second half and split it up. And listen, it's summertime, so we can enjoy our summers and then look
summer break
fall, coming back to a lot of must see shows just from what you guys are explaining. I can't wait to watch those. Guys, listen, thank you so much. Jason, Evan, Howard, this has been tremendous. Can't thank you enough for joining us for first half of season 3. More compelling episodes on the way, as they explained. And you can find the first half under the My World with Jeff Jarrett feed on all your podcast applications of this show. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Until next time, this has been the Dark Side of the Podcast.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.